between the Biden administration and Israel's prime minister after he publicly accused the U.S. of withholding weapons. Benjamin Netanyahu doubled down on the spat, telling Punchbowl News that there is barely a trickle of weapons making its way from the U.S. to Israel. Now, here's the reaction from the White House.
We generally do not know what he's talking about.
It was vexing and disappointing to us, as much as it was incorrect.
I want to bring in Daniel Levy now, the president of the U.S. Middle East Project. He's also a former Israeli peace negotiator and talks to the Palestinians. Thank you for your time, Daniel. First off, what do you make of this very public rift and Netanyahu making these accusations that U.S. officials push back on quite forcefully, and the timing of it all?
Well, indeed. And why this matters is, of course, the key players are the parties over there. Israel, decades of occupation, denying Palestinian rights, preventing refugee return. Palestinians have the right to resist that. They don't have the right, the militant groups, to use violence in the way we saw October 7th, violate international law. Israel has the right to self-defense. It doesn't have the right to violate international law itself, devastate, destroy Gaza, mass killing of civilians. Why the US role matters is that none of this would be possible without the continued flow of American weapons to Israel. It simply couldn't continue, these daily mass civilian casualty killing events, and the possibility now that this might expand to the Lebanon front. So what matters here is that, again, we saw this week testing, US and Israel testing each other, and the American president blinked first, the administration blinked first, and Netanyahu has the commitment on weapons that he most wants.
You know, there also appears to be these divisions between the Israeli military and the Israeli government over Netanyahu's stated goal of destroying Hamas in this war. Here's what the country's top military official, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, said. Listen.
Hamas זה רעיון.
Hamas is an idea. Those who think we can make Hamas disappear are wrong. I'm not talking about the alternatives. This is a decision of the political echelon, and the IDF will implement. But the issue of eliminating Hamas is simply to throw dust in the eyes of the public.
We heard the IDF push back on this, or clarifying Hagari's remarks, saying that he was specifically speaking to the ideology of Hamas and not the military's stated goal of destroying it. Is that how you see it?
No, and I think that's not how most Israelis see it. Of course, the IDF has carried out these actions, and the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice are reviewing what is being done because of the likely violations of international law. But it seems that the IDF is very concerned that a Prime Minister Netanyahu, with his back pushed up against the wall because of domestic politics, is sending them on a mission that cannot succeed. There is a degree of exhaustion in the IDF. I don't think they want the expansion of this war to the Hezbollah front. Many of the senior command officers are worried that they might be replaced by people closer to Netanyahu and the more extremist factions. And therefore, you are now seeing, very unusually, a quite public spat. Both sides are dialing it down a little, but it's not lost on the Israeli public that there is a spat between the military and the political leadership, because this war is not going well. This isn't going to get the hostages back. It's had a tremendous reputational damage to Israel, and the army is being clear. This isn't a mission that is achievable, Mr. Prime Minister.
The IDF may not want to expand this war, to include Hezbollah, but, does it look like they are at a dangerous tipping point, especially when you have these conversations happening between Biden and, officials and Israeli officials this week in Washington, where the U.S. had to reassure them that, look, the U.S. will fully back Israel if there were an all-out war with Hezbollah?
Very important, Amra. So what we've seen is that unless there is a ceasefire in Gaza, something most of the Israeli military want, of course, vital for the Palestinians going through these horrors, but something the Israeli Prime Minister does not want, unless there's a ceasefire there, the escalation is likely to continue elsewhere. There won't be a ceasefire on that Israel-Hezbollah front. And so you could look at this and say, if Hezbollah sense weakness in the US-Israel relationship, then it might be encouraged to move. And therefore, important for the US to make clear the weapons will flow. But the other way of looking at that is that if Israel knows the weapons will continue and the US has its back for a second front war, that will encourage Netanyahu down that path. The crucial variable to plug in here is that most analysts, I think, correctly assess Iran and Hezbollah don't want an escalation, but the Israeli prime minister is the wild card here. And telling him you have the weapons is a very problematic move by the Biden administration if it doesn't want more war. And that war would, I imagine, work against the American national security interest. It also might not play well at home domestically. Apparently, you have an election there in November.
U.S. officials also are concerned, that in the event of a full-blown war with Hezbollah, Israel's Iron Dome, provided by the U.S., obviously, could be overwhelmed. And we know that Hezbollah, has been stockpiling for years all kinds of weapons and ammunition, and the concern by Israel are these precision-guided munitions that they believe Hezbollah has been stockpiling. What would a wider war mean for the region in terms of how devastating this could be?
Precisely implied in your question is how devastating this will be for the country of Lebanon, for Israelis. In the past, Israel has carried out not quite the level of horrors in Gaza, but wholesale destruction of Lebanese civilian infrastructure and targets. Israel would not be spared that. Israelis are not looking at this with relish. Iran might become directly involved. And in fact, the Israeli military is warning of this, I think, as a way of trying to suggest that this is not a good place to go. And I hope we see an administration lean in the US and prevent this in ways they have conspicuously failed to prevent what has gone on in Gaza in the last 9 months.
Daniel Levy, appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
People in a town in Oklahoma looked up and they saw a plane coming way too close to the ground.